And we are back and continuing to talk about the Arab Spring, and this specifically will be discussing the Egyptian Revolution. And here, what we're going to start to see is how every revolution doesn't necessarily work out the way you want it to. And in Egypt's case, it's kind of still going on, so it's a decent amount of stuff here, so let's just get right into it. So what we have here is a revolution that very similarly to Tunisia would start as an uprising against a dictator. I'll talk about that more in just a moment. And it began on January 25th, 2011, something known as the Day of Wrath, which I think is a fantastic name. You know, history, we have some sketchy names. This is a quality name. And what it really was huge demonstrations, peaceful protests, as well as civil disobedience. And if you remember, civil disobedience is when you have unjust or discriminatory laws, and then you go out and break them to, you know, bring attention to these horrible, horrible laws. And think like, you know, the Freedom Riders or sit-ins in the United States during like the 50s and 60s. And what these people are going against is the 30-year reign of Hosni Mubarak. The gentleman there on the right, Hosni Mubarak, basically brutally controlled Egypt for 30 years, throwing people in jail without a trial, having people executed, having people imprisoned and tortured, no actual rights for people, no freedom of expression, too many people gathering in a group. You could find yourself being investigated for like possible trying to take over the government and all sorts of craziness. There were curfews. It was just brutal. But he's not going to have any of this protest nonsense. He saw what happened in Tunisia, and he wasn't going to let what happened in Tunisia happen in his country. So he has the military go right after these protesters, and within just a couple weeks, you see over 846 people being injured or being killed, over 6,000 people being injured. And this revolution is going perhaps down the road toward civil war. You can see here some government and people clash as you see this kid trying to throw something at the police, and then you see this guy here with a shotgun. You see this guy's about to get beat down pretty severely here by the police. It's not going to go well for him. But with every police and military clash, the protests will grow and grow. And one of the reasons they grow is because of the use of social networks. Now, in the United States of America, we have social networks. We kind of birthed them, you know, going all the way back to MySpace and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and all sorts of fun stuff. And for the most part in the United States, I mean, it can be used to organize things, but it's often used, you know, kind of in casual or leisure time, or sometimes not the most appropriate of things, and other times for news and stuff like that. And, you know, if you're interested in that, feel free to follow me at Mr. Lynn History. But aside from giving myself a shout out, in Egypt, you saw something very radically different. You had the use of particularly Twitter and Facebook to help run this revolution. Twitter was used to show pictures and video of what these people were going through and the beatings and the attacks and things along that line. It was also used to say, you know, get people together because the government controlled the media, so it wasn't like you were going to go through any standard types of channels, that you had to, you know, use this new technology that the government wasn't really regulating. And that is when in steps a man by the name of Wael Ghonim, who was a man that created really the first Facebook page about fighting the government. And it started, as you'll see in a short video clip in a second, that there was a gentleman who was threatening to expose corruption and was killed by the police. And of course, there was nothing of consequence done to those guys. And so he really is, uses his website to get people organized. He's the one that got the protest to start on January 25th, and we continue to drive this revolution. And so you see something really radically different happening with social media here. And so let's check that out.
The peaceful Egyptian revolution had a distinct goal, but no clear leader. Yet from the masses, a handful emerged, including Wael Ghonim. His tweets offered both a narrative and a nudge to protesters.
He's been sort of tweeting every day, almost every hour, and he's developed quite a massive followers. He's become a figurehead of this revolt. I guess we can now call it a revolution.
It's generally acknowledged that Ghanim's Facebook page first sparked the protests. Titled "We Are All Khalid Said," it memorialized an Egyptian businessman who'd been beaten to death by police after threatening to expose corruption. The page called for protests on January 25th. That became known as the Day of Wrath, as thousands poured onto the streets. Ghanim's arrest by Egyptian authorities on January 28th and release 12 days later only added to his legend. When Ghonim is mentioned, usually his company is too.
Google executive Wael Ghonim created a Facebook page that
He's the Middle East and North Africa marketing manager at Google. So far, Google...
So understand that this is a guy that had a great job, was making good money, was comfortable, but despite that, and at the risk of his own life, decided to try to make a change.
Google has commented only briefly. We can't comment on his personal beliefs. He's on leave at the moment, and we look forward to having him back at Google.
It's a little bit tricky here, this relationship here, because this is an employee of Google, yes, but he's acting on his own time.
Robert Solomon says companies in emerging markets like Egypt, where governments are big customers, need to be careful not to bite the hand that feeds them. Is this connection likely a good thing or a bad thing for Google?
Well, on the one hand, it could be a bad thing, to the extent that Ghanim's activities raise some questions or jeopardize some relationships that Google has in Egypt. However, it might be a good thing if people now view Google as a good place to work and a place that allows young people to have a voice.
A voice which ushered in a social revolution in Egypt, where the most powerful weapon was social networking. Seth Doan, CBS News, New York.
And Wael Ghonim is still at Google. He's at actually a different section of it called Google Ventures, but he's still working there. He also founded something called the Tahrir Academy, which was a technology NGO or non-governmental organization that is trying to increase education for economic purposes in Egypt because the economy is also kind of shot. And he's also the co-founder of a company called Parleo, which is like a social network to get people more involved in the political process. And so you see here, I mean, I think this was a great picture done that's showing all these different, types of social network and technology things that was being used here. And we see these clashes and stuff like that. But what those technologies did was really give people a unity here. These pictures on the right and left here are really important because it showed how unified Egypt had become against Mubarak. On the left, you see the guys standing holding hands are Christians that are surrounding Muslims as they pray. Egypt has a large Christian community, Coptic Christians. However, they're still a minority in the country, and there's been issues between Muslim governments and the Christians in the past. But here they're able to put this stuff aside with the whole idea of really working toward freedom. And this was as a direct result of one time when government forces came in to attack protesters while they prayed, and these guys were trying to protect them. And then on the right, you see a Christian church in the background and surrounded by Muslims who were returning the favor, and you can see the momentum starting to go. And eventually, as a result of that, on February 11th, 2011, Mubarak steps down. And this time he's actually captured as the military takes control to try to calm everything down and organize elections. Mubarak was arrested and sentenced to life in prison for murder. However, it's been a little chaotic since then. On the right is him in jail. It was seen that some of the trials were not done properly for his initial sentencing, so he did get retrial on some of his counts. I'm not going to go into all of them. You're more than welcome to look it up. Some of them were thrown out. But then he got put on trial for corruption and embezzlement, and that he was actually found guilty and forced to repay $20 million and put in jail for 3 years, as well as his 2 sons were put in jail for 4 years. Currently, he is awaiting retrial for the murder charges that were levied against him for inciting his security forces to kill protesters. And so that trial is going to come at some point, but we're still kind of waiting for it. Now, at this point, you do get a new government, but it takes a little while. The military regains control, and after 6 months, citizens are still waiting for this election, and it doesn't seem to be happening. So people are getting a little antsy, but finally the federal government announces that, okay, no, we're good. We're going to have these elections now. Yay, we're going to have elections. And the problem came with who got to be a candidate. There were many people that were putting in for it, but candidates were getting like disqualified or forbidden to run, and no one really knew why. So it seemed like there was a little air that this election was kind of getting rigged, and eventually you got a couple candidates, and the man that came out on top in 2012 was Mohamed Morsi. And everything seemed to be, okay, we got this down, we have a legislature, we have a president, let's just see where this goes. Well, unfortunately, it's not going to go great. When you see on the top right there, that is Mohamed Morsi in jail, because it turns out that Morsi was backed by the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood in the past had been a traditional terrorist group. They were actually the ones that killed Anwar Sadat after signing the Camp David Accords. However, some of them supposedly have become legit, but not a lot of people were liking that because of the problems that the Brotherhood had caused in Egypt. And he wasn't getting the Constitution effectively changed enough. People weren't getting their rights. Things were going slowly. The economy absolutely stunk. And so during late 2012 and early 2013, you get more uprisings and everything's going on. It's like we're back at square zero. And once again, protesters are killed. So what ends up happening then is that Morsi gets overthrown by the military, and he's put on trial for inciting murder, imprisoning and torturing people, and he's actually sentenced to death. But there were tons of people, not only the Muslim Brotherhood, but others that were in support of him. And on the bottom right there, you actually see a pro-Morsi protest rally. And so you've got all sorts of crazy things, and then you still also have this corruption that's possibly going on the court, and so how many are we even getting a fair trial? So since 2014, we've got some crazy stuff going on. Crime rates are high, unemployment is still absolutely absurd, okay? And again, remember, in the end, we talked about this with Tunisia, you need to have a good economy, okay? When the economy tanks, people don't, they're not happy. People can't buy food, people can't provide for their family, and so that gets them on edge. And if that goes on long enough, people are going to start to rebel again. And then many people were really upset with this whole government coup thing, okay? And actually, to give you an idea how bad the unemployment rate is, I was actually just looking it up here. I want to make sure I have it right. In the third quarter of 2015, so that was done basically at the end of, October there? No, at the end of September. It's at 12.7%, and that's a lot. I'm sorry, no, it's 12.8%, and that's a lot. 5% unemployment is bad, and they're at 12.8%. People don't like the fact that it was a military coup. However, the leader of the military, to try to calm things down, is like, look, I'm going to step down. We're going to have new elections, and everything's going to be okay. And people are like, all right, well, let's see where this goes. And they have the elections, and the new president was this man that you see on the right here in a military uniform, is Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, who happened to be the former leader of the military. And then he has that job back too. And as you see, a little bit of a typo there, I apologize. And it's crazy. So now you've got the military leader of the coup back because he was quote-unquote elected, and the rights still aren't there, and you're still getting regular protests. And there's no sense of what's going on. So to sum up, Mubarak is a crazy dictator. He gets overthrown. Morsi comes in, but supported by a terrorist group that people don't get he gets overthrown and is currently in jail. Then the guy that led the coup gets elected, if you will, but he hasn't really given any rights back, and you still have protests, and he's beat up on protesters. And so just because you have a revolt doesn't mean it always works out real well. And, so here's a little clip just to give an idea of what's going on now.
July the 3rd. A day many Egyptians will remember for generations. The defense minister, surrounded by secular, leftist, and religious leaders, makes what many people consider a stunning declaration.
تعطيل العمل بالدستور بشكل مؤقت.
This roadmap includes suspending the constitution, holding early presidential and parliamentary elections, and the formation of a national reconciliation committee that will include young people.
It was a decision welcomed by this crowd of army supporters who chanted, "It's a new revolution." The shocked supporters of the deposed President Mohamed Morsi called it a coup. Back in 2012, when Morsi was elected president, he appointed Abdel Fattah al-Sisi defense minister in a sweeping overhaul of the military. At the time,
So the irony is that he actually appointed the guy who overthrew him. Bummer.
Egyptians had high hopes that their new president would introduce political reforms and build a strong economy. Instead, the opposition and the Christian minority became increasingly concerned about the rise of political Islam. And anti-Morsi protests started to gain momentum. People said Morsi and his group, the Muslim Brotherhood, threatened their young democracy. After Morsi was deposed, his supporters set up protest camps and promised to stay for as long as it took for their leader to be returned to office. Egyptian security forces stormed those camps. Hundreds of people were killed, according to human rights organizations. And attack starters of the Muslim Brotherhood were put in jail. Some now face death sentences. Seen by many of his supporters as a savior, Sisi was elected president in June. The vote had to be extended because of a low turnout. Sisi's rival Hamdin Sabahi hit out at the election as flawed. During his inauguration, Egypt's new president promised a prosperous future.
We will establish a strong republic that will be just, safe, and stable, prosperous and blessed.
Sisi rejected calls for a reconciliation with the banned Muslim Brotherhood, and that has only raised concerns about more clampdowns on dissent in Egypt.
So, and this is where we're at right now. So, will they get to where they were trying to get to? I just don't know. But nonetheless, it's still a pretty fluid situation. Sisi is still in control, but will they get that true republic that they were looking for? I just don't know. All right, so get your comments and questions, and I'll see you guys in class.